Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are on this beautiful planet of ours. So thrilled that you can all join us today. My name is Michelle Maloney. I'm the co-founder and national convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AELA. And today I'm really delighted to have Jo Brewer and Penny Heiple for a really wonderful discussion about learning with the Design School for Regenerating Earth. For those who don't know, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance is a small not-for-profit, and we're passionate about building earth-centered thinking, action, and governance. So we run a lot of different programs across a lot of different areas. So if you're not familiar with AELA, please check out our website, which Sarah will pop into the chat, earthlaws.org.au. We're also launching this year's Earth Arts program, which you can find on the eartharts.org.au website, and we'll say a bit more about that at the end. But now I would love to introduce our guest speakers in the context of bioregioning. AELA is hosting a webinar series, particularly for Australian audiences, but we're inviting lots of lovely folks from all around the world to join us. For us, being passionate about earth-centered everything means being passionate about localizing and understanding local economies, local peoples, and very importantly, our local non-human, more than human environments. Bioregioning for me is a perfect lens to bring everything all together. And instead of just focusing on one thing or being siloed, we actually look at an integrated way of how we can rethink industrialized society's ways of living, working, playing, and caring for each other and the earth. So in that regard, I'm really delighted to invite Jo and Penny to speak with us today about their design school. I'm personally really excited because I'm going to be joining their cohort this year and connecting with as many things as I can. And I should also give a plug for Bioregioning Month. It's turning into September is sort of turning into this groovy global bioregioning month, because I'm going to ask Jo and Penny to talk about what they're up to in Colombia, where they live, but also in the Mediterranean. And AELA will be hosting a whole bunch of cool things in September. So please keep an eye on that. And also, if you're passionate about country in Australia, we acknowledge country. And I normally do that first. Without my slides, I get all over the place. But I really would like to acknowledge all First Nations peoples across the planet, but particularly in Australia. I am deeply excited and honoured every day to live on Cubby Cubby country, which is north of Brisbane. And I want to acknowledge all First Nations peoples on this call, and certainly acknowledge the remarkable, what Westerners would now call, one of the oldest continuous bioregional governance systems in the world, which is the First Nations and Aboriginal peoples of this continent. So it has become a bit of a tradition for folks in Australia to pop in the chat whose country you're on, where you are, maybe a gentle observation about creatures and plants that you've seen today. I will praise the joys of bees, because in my garden this morning there were teddy bear bees and giant fluffy carpenter bees, puddle to, and of course blue-banded bees, and a couple of Euro bees. And that's okay. I'm a Euro descendant and so are they. All right, enough from me. Jo and Penny, how are you today? I'm very excited to see you.
Well, obviously, we're very excited to be here as well. Although, if you see bags under our eyes, it's because we were in the greater Toronto bioregion. Toronto is the Indigenous name that later got translated into Toronto in Canada. And we were flying overnight last night and traveling through most of today to get back to where we live in Colombia. And now it's evening for us. It's 7 p.m. So just to have a sense that we're keeping ourselves going here. And Penny and I are partners in life and partners in crime. We're the co-founders of the Design School for Regenerating Earth, which we'll give a little overview of in a minute. But to follow the recognizing and acknowledging of land, we are calling in from a beautiful place called Barichara, Colombia, which is the ancestral homelands of the Guane people. And it's in the northern Andes in a unique tropical dry forest that is blended with a cloud forest. So it's the only one of its kind on Earth. And of course, it's at risk of going completely extinct by human destruction patterns. So there's a lot of local work to try to stop and reverse that. And I'll pass it over to Penny to say hi.
No, just really glad to be here. Excited for tonight. Excited to be interacting with all of you. And yeah, we've been starting to connect more and more with people in Australia. So this is exciting to be connecting even more through this. So happy to be here.
Fantastic. So happy to have you. All right, I will jump out of the way and let you guys and girls share your lovely updates on what you're up to this year. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we've actually prepared two presentations. Because you could think of Penny and me are almost like one body with two heads in a way, is that we really deeply integrate what we do, but we do things in very different and complementary ways. So maybe I'll start by saying that I have the more academic, intellectual, nerdy kind of lots of time in universities, integrating different kinds of knowledge background. I'm a transdisciplinary, put knowledge together from lots of fields kind of person. So just to give you the main ones, lots of stuff with earth systems and how the earth works, cultural evolution, complexity science, cognitive and behavioral science, and then all of those integrated into how do we as human beings avoid going extinct because we're totally screwing up the biosphere. And so that's a flavor of me. And I was born and raised in the Ozarks bioregion, which is where the first bioregional Congress was held on Turtle Island in North America in 1981. I grew up in Missouri, and Penny comes from Colorado, from the Rocky Mountains. And I think what we want to do today, you'll also see I'm sort of the dancing monkey of the pair, and Penny is the one that sits back and watches me trip over myself. She's the introvert observer who takes everything in and then designs the systems for the humans to work in. She does admin and operations like a wizard. But as you'll also see in our presentation, she does a lot of work with the inner realm of human development, trauma healing, presencing, meditation, mindfulness, and many other things that Penny will share with us soon. But what I want to do before we go into the presentation, because we have some slides, is give you a little context for the presentation we're going to give. So we put together a presentation in January, or to be published January 1st. That was the vision for the design school for 2026. And when I was thinking about today, I thought, I'll just walk through the first half of those slides because it actually is a really nice summary and overview of what we're doing. And then Penny has another set of slides that she'll share that complement it to go a little bit deeper. But the basic thing that I want to say before starting the slides is that our focus is on how do we as human beings reintegrate ourselves into the living tapestry of the planet and participate wholesale in the regeneration of the earth as a whole, which requires us to organize ourselves as bioregions. Because bioregions are not only, as Michelle said, really great ways to have a holistic integrative approach, they're also real. And so we can organize ourselves with them. That there is an ecological way in which life organizes itself as part of the dynamic earth, and we can partner with that. And so that leads to a translocal kind of a strategy, which is working in parallel in many different places to achieve shared goals all over the planet. So is there anything you'd like to say before I jump in?
No, go ahead.
Cool.
Jump right in.
Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my slides on my screen right now. And the presentation that I want to share with you is this one. And the first thing is to say, we call ourselves the Design School for Regenerating Earth. And just to give a little bit of the wording, design is really the application of any knowledge to tackle any kind of challenge. So I think of design in the most general sense, not just making cool products to sell in the market. And school is that none of us has ever regenerated the earth, so we all have a lot of learning to do. And that our focus really is on what we can each do in our local place to rise up to the planetary scale. And so to give you a sense of that, I'll give you a whirlwind tour of our history that led to the design school, or at least the one that starts in 2020, so 6 years ago. 6 years ago, basically December 14th of 2019, I sat down and started writing a manuscript of a book, and 2 weeks later, I'd written the first 16 chapters. It was like I was vomiting onto the page. I just couldn't hold back. The floodgates had been broken. I'd been gathering everyone else's great ideas for a long time, and I found a great way to tell a story that wove together lots of other people's ideas. And then I invited people to join a study group to read the manuscript, and we called it Earth Regenerators. It grew to several thousand members and did a lot of things. But the book that was actually published about a year later is called The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. And the key thing is the singular nature of that word, that really there's only one way to regenerate the earth, and that is to bring ourselves back into dynamic harmony with the living processes of the planet, which means we have to organize ourselves as a planetary network of bioregions, each doing regeneration in our own local landscapes in locally appropriate ways. And so we spent about 3 years I think I gave 250 webinars. We had 5,000 members, so lots of people taught lots of things. And it led us to see that we were ready to stop exploring the design pathway and start living it. And so in March of 2023, the design school was born, where we started really focusing on the landscapes, the bioregions themselves, or the classroom, even though we have an online platform for shared learning and coordination. And in the fall of 2022, until the end of 2024, Penny and I engaged in 2 years of what we call bioregional activations. This is just a really powerful way of traveling, where we would be invited by people from different communities to come and help the people who live in their place to see themselves as the bioregion that they are. So we started with a trip into part of the Colorado River Basin in North America. Then later we did some travel in the Great Lakes of North America in the US and Canada. And then later we worked with Cascadia, a bioregional movement in the Pacific Northwest, also in North America. And we had been organizing where we live in Colombia around the Northern Andes. And so we started all of these different ways of traveling to catalyze bioregional ways of thinking and acting for people to start organizing themselves. The other thing that we do in the design school is using the solar cycle of the equinoxes. So the equinoxes are in March and September. Every year we host a learning journey that starts in March. So we have one that starts in 2 weeks and it runs through September. And we've hosted 3 learning journeys in each of the first 3 years so far. The first one was, what we're doing is so weird and so unusual, we actually need a learning journey about what is the design school. Because so we could show people this crazy thing we're doing. And that was really helpful. For the second year, in 2024, where we had a learning journey called Birthing of Bioregional Learning Centers. And now members of the design school are actually creating them in different parts of the world. And then last year in 2025, how to organize your bioregion. And so we just started getting much more practical about helping people start up and get going in parallel in as many places as possible. Now, we also were able to attract funding in interesting ways. The most basic one is to join the design school, you pay membership dues. In US dollars, it's $5 per month or $50 per year, or you can do the $100 pay it forward to provide scholarships for people who can't afford it. And then we pool that money together and give it back to our members for them to do regenerative work on the ground where they live. And that has enabled us, this whole set of processes of going out and activating bioregions, hosting learning processes online, and mobilizing seed funding to support on-the-ground organizing, where we now have members on 5 continents. Some of them are in Australia. And we have a burgeoning planetary network of bioregions working locally, autonomously, but also collaborating across the planet to do the long work of regenerating the Earth. And so you can see that the design school is not an online course. We do a hell of a lot more than that. So I want to briefly just remind us why we need to be doing something so bold and innovative. And I want to just give us a very quick version of our planetary context. The human population did this when we started turning oil into humans with the Green Revolution, this explosion of human population. Eventually that has to overshoot and course correct. And so there's this need for us to take our completely unsustainable global system and start composting it as it's dying, knowing that if we overshoot too much, human extinction's a real possibility. And so we're really in a very dangerous planetary scale predicament where we have to reimagine everything. So what we do as Earth regenerators is we sort of build a bridge to the future world by planting seeds of bioregional regeneration in the bioregions where all of us live, with the idea that as this huge global behemoth of unsustainability dies and is composted, that we've planted seeds of regenerative culture organized as bioregions in enough places that even if the collapse is really horrible, that we don't get to a population of 0. This is what I would call worst case scenario planning. You take the worst case scenario and try and find the best thing you could do in it. And then if the scenarios that we live out are better than that, it was still the right strategy to do. So that's how we organize our thinking for the way that we're doing the work in the design school. And of course, we don't know what it's going to look like on the other side, we've got to build our way to get there. So there's a huge amount of surrender, managing complexity, and things that Penny will talk about, the inner work of being human beings, living through a process as complex and honestly horrifying and scary as this situation. So we need to somehow contribute to regenerating the earth during the most intense period of systemic collapse, which is basically starting about now and running through the next 40 or 50 years. And we want to somehow manage to have humans on the other side, as well as millions of other species that are currently at risk of going extinct or have already gone extinct. So basically, we need to bolster up as much biodiversity as we can and keep the human population from getting to zero as we navigate a very difficult time of scary planetary collapse. That's sort of the reality of where we're at. And that's the basis that we think about. Why do we need the design school? And so in 2020, when we started talking about there is a way to organize across the entire planet, then what do? What are our practices or our focus? One thing is that we focus on holding a coherent narrative. Coherent means that it's consistent with the different parts, that it has integrity, that it's honest and true as much as possible, that it's pragmatic and practical, and that people who are doing diverse and different things can still feel like they're doing the same big thing. If we're regenerating the earth, the way you do it where you live may be different from how I do it where I live, but the narrative is we're each doing our part to regenerate the earth, whether it's lowering carbon dioxide levels or restoring wetlands or being sure that mangroves exist in our coastal areas, in the tropics, whatever it is that's part of that planetary narrative, we hold the coherence of it. The second one is we actually are, as we've said, growing a planetary network of bioregions, people all over the world. And then we support learning exchanges within the bioregions and between the bioregions through the design school. And this allows for the local teams who are organizing wherever they live on Earth to grow their capacities to do regenerative work that moves toward the bioregional scale. And the bioregional scale is very large. And so it takes time to get there. And then we want to integrate all of this with planetary processes, things like the evaporation from the ocean that creates precipitation patterns on land. The example I like to give from North America is that water evaporates from the Pacific Ocean that creates snowpack in the Rocky Mountains, and that's the water supply for the Colorado River. That basically these are planetary scale Earth processes that we have to integrate ourselves with. And that's a very important part of what we do in the design school. All right, so our focus this year in 2026 is in two places. We've already started building a planetary network of bioregions in the last few years. So now we just want to steward it collaboratively in a participatory way, strengthen the capacities across the network. And then we want to weave this planetary network through an intensifying process of social, economic, political, and ecological collapse that is accelerating on all fronts at the same time. Just look at what the insane United States did a couple of days ago in Iran. The collapse processes are happening everywhere, and we need to somehow do Earth regeneration through them. So when we talk about stewarding the planetary network, let me give you a couple examples. The design school is very multifaceted because our members lead a lot of processes. So for example, we have community spaces in our online platform that are created and hosted by our members. Here's a sampling of some of them. We have a person from Tunisia that hosts an online permaculture design course. There's a group called Metachrysalis that does alternate reality gaming to apply complex systems thinking to disaster response to move toward regeneration. Story Moss is the weaving of stories of regeneration around the world. We have collaborative governance where people are currently focusing on learning sociocracy, but you can also learn pro-social and other collaborative governance processes. We have a water temple and regenerative challenges, book clubs. We have things that happen in different languages. So we have Grupo de Hispanohablantes in Spanish, and we have a new group that just formed that's in Dutch. And people are starting to bring their multicultural lenses into the design school. Then we also have a lot of self-guided learnings. And just a few examples, all three of our previous learning journeys in the design school, as well as the 6 previous learning journeys during the Days of Earth Regenerators are all available as self-guided learnings. We've hosted more than 30 regenerative finance labs that are recorded that you can go through. Tomorrow, I'm hosting the last session in the series of Earth Regeneration and Practice, and a lot more. But it's to say that we steward this planetary network by curating learning resources that people can guide themselves through at their own pace and based on their own interests. And then we also created place-based hubs for our members to do local organizing. So these are public community spaces that are not behind the paywall. They're free to join. And this allows our members to invite people from their local communities to come on the platform for free, but just in a limited area focused on their place. So I think we're now up to 25 or 30 place-based hubs, and it's growing regularly now. This is a place for learning exchanges within those places. So an example of a place-based hub would be the Western European group, or the Marin-Sonoma County group in California, or the Northern Andes hub in South America. And they engage in learning exchanges within their place-based hubs. And then through bioregional update sessions in the design school, they also can learn from each other. So basically what we're trying to do is build a planetary community of practice, which we've actually already done, but we want to keep building and expanding, strengthening it, including more things in it, that is deeply sustaining the fabric of social interaction so that we can have a true planetary network of bioregions with really robust social supports, emotional supports, and learning supports. All right, so we said we're doing this weaving through collapse toward Earth regeneration. So I just want to give us a little context. Collapse is not the collapse of the US empire, even if it was, that started around 1980. But basically collapse for most of us is a mental image of 5 minutes of really intense scenes from a Hollywood movie. But the truth is the collapse we're living through began before any of us on this call was born. And now we're entering a new phase of increasing extremes, this intensifying of many different collapse processes, and that it's going to last longer than any of us here will live. So if we're going to regenerate the earth, we have to get good at doing it through collapse, but not to avoid collapse. So this leads to our next learning journey that starts on March 17th, called Regenerating the Earth Through Collapse. So it starts in 2 weeks. We encourage you to come join us. To become a design school member gives you access to all of our learning resources, including especially the learning journey. So just become a member of the design school and come and hang out with us in our learning journey. So I just said we're regenerating through collapse. What do I mean that collapse has already started? Well, here are a couple examples. According to the Global Ecological Footprint, we have been in planetary scale ecological overshoot since 1970. For more than 50 years, we have been consuming more than natural renewable processes or regenerative processes could restore since 1970. We've crossed at least 7 of 9 planetary boundaries that define a safe operating space for humanity, according to the Stockholm Resilience Center. We are now in extreme wealth inequality and institutional capture, where less than 1% of the human population basically controls all of our world governments, our national governments, most of our local governments, and our multinational corporations. And they are not taking us to a future that's good for any living being. We're also in a thing called the meta crisis, which is where our ability to make sense of what is happening breaks down. There's too much change too rapidly. It's too complex. We don't even know what the hell is going on anymore. The propaganda and misinformation are overwhelming. Artificial intelligence generated deep fakes where the video content looks real and so forth. So we're in collapse of sense making, which is a really serious issue. And also the extractive logic of globalized capitalism dominates all sectors of human activity at local, regional, and planetary scales. So not only are we already in overshoot, we're beating that thing while it's down. And that's what the logic is of, quote, business as usual. So through all of this, somehow, we need to realign humanity with living systems of the earth. And so that's where you can see that we have this learning journey about regenerating the earth through collapse. So how do we structure this so that it starts to get practical and concrete? Well, like I said, it begins in March and ends in September. So it runs for 6 months. And we're dividing it into 2 halves. The first half is the laying the groundwork, creating a shared understanding of what Earth regeneration is, how to organize bioregionally, what it means to be in collapse, what kinds of collapse are we talking about. And so we have 5 2-week cycles where every 2 weeks we host a webinar where we present information, community calls, which are Zoom sessions with breakouts to get into small groups for the design school members to talk with each other about what came up in the webinars. And then also, because of the emotional weight and the spiritual weight of this topic, we have integration sessions. Our friends Neil Davidson and Ann Billen of a group called And Now What host integration sessions for us to process this emotionally and intellectually so that we can hold it. And then the second half of the learning journey is 5 cycles of design practice, which is 2-week cycles of case studies, real world practice, and lived experience. But we think that it's really important this time around to spend a very significant amount of time offline. So in the months of June and September, we are taking more than a month where there are no online offerings in the learning journey. There are no webinars or community calls, anything like that. We put those on pause, and then we travel into the world to do on-the-ground organizing. In June, Penny and I are going to travel throughout the Mississippi River Basin of North America, which spans from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachian Mountains and from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's about half of the continental United States. We're going to be traveling along the major headwaters and confluences of rivers that form the Mississippi River system. And then in September, we're going to the Mediterranean and spreading across Western Europe, traveling on a bioregional pilgrimage of awakening. What does it mean to regenerate the Mediterranean, the northern African coast, and the northern part of the Great Saharan Desert, as well as the rivers and landscapes of Europe? So you can see that we are serious about this not just being an online course. I hope that's clear. So we're weaving across a planetary network, seeding consciousness and capacity in multiple ways through all of the different activities that are happening, and then grounding into place by helping our members to organize themselves locally with autonomy, but with support. And so we've been gathering members from all over the world. We currently have members, as you can see, there's some in Australia. We have members on every continent, except we have parts of Asia that are fairly underpopulated so far because we started in English, and we don't have anyone on Antarctica. But otherwise, we've got all the continents covered. So we're off to a good start for only being 3 years in. And so we've been gathering members from all over the world, people who usually feel isolated and alone. And when they come online, they find the others, which is one of the most valuable things we actually do, is helping people not feel alone with the seriousness of what's going on. And then, as I mentioned, we created these place-based hubs. And so we help people organize in their own bioregions by setting up their place-based hubs and then creating learning exchanges between them. And so we are doing this for real. And that's the presentation I wanted to give. Like I said, it's really a whirlwind tour of what we're doing in the design school. And now I'm going to pass it over to Penny to take us in a different direction.
Yeah, well, I just want to mention one thing is that with those place-based hubs, there's an Oceania hub that has just opened in the school and another hub in Australia that's opening. So just so y'all know, there's some action happening there already in those place-based hubs. So I wanted to take us in another direction and share another main focus of the design school, which is on the inner work, or the centrality of human consciousness. Because what will it actually take for humans, for us to be capable of doing what Joe just shared, of actually doing this level of organizing, this level of cooperation across the planet? Who do we need to become? Because clearly we aren't quite there yet, but who do we need to become to actually be able to do this? So as we all know, humans with different levels of consciousness affect the planet in very, very different ways. If you look here on the pictures on the left, we have the consumer culture, we have the degradation of landscapes, we have ginormous cities, and people like sitting there on their phone, looking at their phone all day long. So this produces some results that we can see. And then over here, we have a permaculture farm integrated with the landscape. We have a woman hugging a tree. We have indigenous women planting and caring for land. We have children going through the forest, learning about native seeds, learning about different plants. So you can see there's a very, very different impact depending on the level of consciousness of the people interacting with the planet. We can have actually beneficial effect, or we can have a destructive effect. But there's really no unified we when it comes to consciousness, when we talk about humanity as if we're all the same, but we're not all the same in this way. So for example, many humans are completely ignorant of the planetary predicament we're in. And without awareness, they don't really have choice, and they don't have sovereignty. Many of us have a little bit of a clue now, oh, maybe something's not quite right, but we are ignoring it or denying it. So some of us are just starting to awaken to the seriousness of the situation. Some of us have been awake for quite a while, for decades. Some of us have seen this and are awake. But some of us who are awake are actively choosing the charred path. This comes from a prophecy from the Anishinaabe, the seventh and eighth fire prophecy, where they say we have a choice where we can choose. Humanity is going to come to a point where we have a choice where we can choose the charred path or the green path. And the charred path is the destruction of life. It's the continuing destruction of life. And we can see that there are people in power positions and not in power positions still continuing to destroy life and choosing that path. But there are some of us who are awake and actually want to choose the green path. We want to, but we're not yet able to fully embody it. And then there's a few of us, the people here on this call. There's a few of us who are awake and are actively choosing to embody and walk this path to the best of our ability. None of us are perfect at this, but we're attempting it. So for those people who are attempting this green path, I think we all know we have to do more than just the outer work. We can't just be doing the doing. We also have to be doing the inner work and the interpersonal work. So the left side here shows the outer work. This is what Joe was talking about, the doing. We need to integrate ourselves with the living processes of the planet, organize around caring for each other and our life places, and do this in concert across the planet. So that's the doing, but what's the inner work? So there's individual and collective inner work. On an individual level, the reconnection and healing it's critical. This is the trauma work that we all need to do because we've been disconnected from the earth. We've been disconnected from ourselves. We've been disconnected from each other as humans and from spirit. And so this healing work, it's actually what the core of all of this work is about. It's about becoming really human again, becoming a full human again, fully connected to life. And from there comes a clarification of our purpose on multiple levels. First, at an individual level, what is my gift? What am I going to be putting in? What am I going to be offering into this as a unique being? What do I bring? What's my part to play? And also reconnecting with our human purpose of our sacred responsibility to care for life because we are part of life. And then also our spiritual purpose, which is that bigger purpose. Why are we here? So that starts to become clear as we do this inner work. And then we cultivate our sovereignty. So sovereignty means we can embody, we can live out our purpose. Not just think about it, not just talk about it and do something else, but we actually can choose to embody and live it out with integrity and with devotion. So that's on the individual level. And then collectively, we also are doing interpersonal work, the inner work of cultural trauma healing, the collective trauma healing, and the ability to be in a pro-social groups that can stay on purpose, that can work through conflict, that have collective governance. So finding, working in groups, working with leadership, working with power dynamics, all of these interpersonal issues that usually are what sidetrack us on any of this. I think we all know that the interpersonal can be some of the hardest part of this work. So, and then as groups, we need to cultivate our sovereignty as groups and operate with integrity, meaning we actually stay on purpose and we move forward with purpose and integrity and devotion. So I want to take a pause here just to highlight collapse awareness and collapse acceptance, because this is one of those processes that we go through, moving from a stage of becoming collapse aware, just starting to see the polycrisis, the meta crisis, the great unraveling, whatever you want to call it, starting to be aware of it intellectually, through to collapse acceptance, meaning going all the way into the grief and then coming out the other side of that. And this is a very harrowing journey. So we need to be supporting each other in this journey. And it's not really optional for those of us who want to walk the green path. We have to act from a place of facing reality, of being in relationship with reality, so that we can act with integrity and we can act with sovereignty and we can act with effect. So there's not really a choice there, but we need to support each other, because it is, as the collapse processes intensify, we keep going through these feelings of grief, this intense inner pain and challenge. And so we need to support each other over time through this. So through the design school, this is how we're integrating this inside the design school, the outer work and the inner work. Joe already talked about the doing, the outer work side, where we host these learning journeys, bioregional activations. Design school members have been hosting bioregional design immersions in their landscapes, where they're bringing people in their landscapes to immerse themselves in the landscape. We have some deeper organizing happening in various bioregions around the world, where people are setting up these bioregional learning centers, financial ecosystems, regenerative financial ecosystems, and so forth. And we're slowly building this planetary network. So that's the doing side. And then on the inner side and the interpersonal aspects, as Joe was saying, we integrate the inner and the interpersonal into the learning journeys themselves. We've done this in a variety of ways, and in this time we're going to be putting in those integration sessions. And then we also have a space dedicated to this within the school called the Inner Space, which is a space that I opened, where we explore all of these different aspects of the inner work, both individually and collectively. And that was also integrated into last year's learning journey. And Anne and Neil, that Joe mentioned earlier from And Now What, are going to be hosting courageous conversations. And this is particularly around working with collapse acceptance and collapse awareness. So they hold space for that. And then we have all these member-led spaces that are exploring different aspects. For example, the collective governance aspect with the interpersonal, metachrysalis and the water temple, feeling of the water within us and without, book club exploring many different topics, etc. So we have both the outer and the inner balancing within the design school. And I always like to end with this, just like a little hat tip to Joanna Macy, where she talked about active hope, saying it's time for active hope. And it's not because we know what's going to happen. It's not because we know we're going to be successful. It's not even because we know we're going to survive, but because it's time for humanity to come home. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. covered a huge array of topics, and I'm sure many of us are very excited to connect with the international networks that you are building with such love and openness. I wanted to think of a better word, but it wasn't come to me. We have a couple of questions which I might run through, and because there's a number of Australians in the audience, I might also take the liberty of sharing a few slides about some of the stuff going on in Australia, if that's okay. Also to let Penny and Joe know that some of the stuff that we're doing. So first I'll go to some questions, and I'm going to group a few together just so you know. We get some questions in the general chat and I get some privately. So there's been some good questions. I'll start with some practical nuts and bolts. How do you manage the different time zones with your webinars? Or I guess they're recorded. There's some folks asking how they can access them. The Australian time zone is not one often considered by people in other places.
So what we have done in the past is have the webinar recorded. It's live and recorded. So it's live, but then you can watch the recording. And what we've done in the past is have the community calls in either 2 or 3 different time slots, depending on the distribution of our participants. And we have an Australia and New Zealand time window. Good. So yes, we are very appreciative of the fact that the Earth is a sphere, or an oblate spheroid, but it's roughly round. So yeah, we need to be able to account for that.
Excellent. A couple of people have asked, how do we define bioregions? What does that mean? Hold that thought, because I'm actually going to show you a lot of different ways that bioregions can be talked about with some beautiful maps from Australia. So we'll come back to that one. William has asked, what do you mean by acting with sovereignty? And of course, noting that in Australia, sovereignty, and all colonial nations, sovereignty is a loaded term. On one hand, people don't like the word because it's English. On the other hand, a lot of Indigenous groups use it as a word to argue for their pre-existing claim to their place and their home. What were you meaning when you were talking about sovereignty?
Okay, yeah, well, I'll talk about that and you could add to that. So what I would say about the way that I'm meaning it is that there's several different aspects, but that we're able to author our own story. Like as an individual, we can basically, we can choose how we want to live instead of being basically told how we're going to live, or somebody else's story is we're living somebody else's story. So it's about that, and then it's about being able to relatedly live our purpose. So once we become clear about our purpose, then we can actually live into it, embody it, that we have that choice, basically. That's what I would say. And what would you add?
Yeah, and I would add that there's a higher level at the bioregional level. And Michelle, I suspect your maps are going to be examples of what I'm about to say in various ways, which is that colonization was the violence enacted by drawing cartoon drawings on landscapes. It's like, oh, this French guy stuck a piece of wood in the ground and said, this half the continent's for my king, and that sort of thing. And so sovereignty in a bioregional sense is the reclaiming of identity and capacity for governance around the living processes and the living beings of a place. So this is where the rights of nature. So the rights of nature movement, some people may not know this, was really strongly catalyzed by Peter Berg back in the 1990s. He was doing work in Ecuador, but he's from San Francisco and was a pioneer of the early bioregional movement. And one of the things that he found really strongly was that the river didn't have sovereignty in terms of legal jurisdiction. So here's where we get into that more like colonial meaning of sovereignty, but then you hack it. Like, well, if that's what it means, then let's use it in a different way. And so I think like Penny said, there are many ways we can define sovereignty, but the realm of cultivating sovereignty is like reclaiming our authorship, reclaiming our autonomy, reclaiming our personal and collective authority. And you can see a really strong connection with Indigenous land rights, but similarly, you could expand that to many other things, to transgender, to animals, to rivers, like that. There's a discourse that we should have around sovereignty, is what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. What I might do, if it's okay, is just quickly, I'll answer a couple of the other questions that have come through, including why are we starting new groups when Indigenous groups already know a lot of this work? And that's absolutely correct. So I might just tell you a little bit about what we're doing in Australia and then come back. It'll just take about 3 minutes. So bear with me, and I didn't plan to do this, but I'll grab the slides that I sometimes, this one. Okay. So, and For those who don't know about what AELA gets up to, bioregioning, as I think I've already said, is really a beautiful way to look at earth-centered care and earth-centered reform to laws, earth-centered change to how we do our economies. But as we know, Australia is, like so many other countries on earth, a colonial legacy country. We have 1788, massive change in governance. But the Aboriginal governance system, which is one of the oldest continuous cultures and legal and governance systems in the world, is absolutely surviving, thriving, and continuing uninterrupted in many places and being restored in others. So in Australia, our bioregioning efforts have to be really, in some ways, different to other places. And I'm sure many of you are very aware of this. But what I wanted to share with you is what AELA wants to do is connect with the design school, with Joe and Penny and everybody internationally to share ideas from Australia, because people often forget about how much amazing work everyone's doing down here, but also to learn from everybody else with great humility. Now, what I wanted to say is that our sister organisation, Future Dreaming Australia, which was formed with Mary Graham, between Future Dreaming and AELA, we offer decolonisation training and courses, and we're actually starting our 4-week course tomorrow night, I think. So if anyone's interested in decol and thinking about it, Mary Graham and I facilitate that. We have Yin Paradis joining us. We also have speakers from India, because we want to remind people that Western constructs, Western language, Westernized everything has taken over so much of the planet. And the only way we can do true earth-centered care is to really understand where we come from, what our culture is. And in Australia, we have to peel back the layers of colonial impact to try to grapple with a future that has to be decolonialized in some way. I also want to let you all know that I've been working with Mary to create her vision for an Indigenous-led research centre, which is amazing. And Sarah and I are so excited. Warjan Research Centre will be sort of soft launched at the end of this month in Sydney at an event with Judge Preston from the New South Wales Land and Environment Court. We're going to have a big discussion about rights, obligations and duties. And the reason I mention that is because Warjan, Future Dreaming are all infused in AELA's bioregioning work. Because as we know, and this is one of the blurbs for our bioregioning month in September, Australia has a bioregional foundation. Our governance system, and I'm not Indigenous, people know that, but I see this ancient way of caring and developing unique laws for unique places, as well as bringing it all together as the deep inspiration for all of our work. And absolutely all processes must begin with Indigenous knowledge holders in whatever direction they want to take. In Australia, if you talk about bioregions, Western science says we have 89 bioregions and about 115 sub-regions. We've also got catchments, though. These are the major big catchments, and then you've got lots and lots and lots of little catchment areas. So how do you define your bioregioning? That's a biocultural process. You might say you want to use a catchment. That's a lot of Aboriginal territories were sometimes water-bound, sometimes mountain-bound. But ultimately, whether you look at First Nations governance or bioregioning, I guess the big message for us in Australia is nature does not have straight lines very often. The wobbly lines that demarcate desert from jungle and sandy Banksia-filled terrain from jungly beautifulness with forests and rainforests, it's all different. But the Australian system of government and governance, profoundly flawed, classic structure of colonial takeover with its big straight lines and its dodgy attitudes to nature being property, cultural superiority, and a Western way of thinking, not all of which is bad, but that's what I wanted to say, is that the Australian way is absolutely about decolonising how we think and slowing down to work at the speed of trust and making sure that we work in deep partnership with the folks. That's my little standard blurb. So for anybody working on regenerative anything in Australia, please do connect as we start to build bioregioning simply as a common word. No one is telling anyone what to do, but it's a common word to say, hey, we're looking across our place in lots of different ways. So that's my stealing the show for 3 minutes. Thank you for your patience. But for the Australian audience, it's really important to know, number one, our work has to be linked to decolonising the way we think. In our course, we talk about 4 structures of decolonisation, or 4 elements of a framework. We missed the opportunity for the first one, which was to send the British back home. Unfortunately, we're all still here. That's okay, but we're wrecking the joint. But the other three are about decolonising our fundamental governance, legal, institutional structures, and then decolonising the way we think as a human being and decolonising professional ways of working. None of it's perfect, but anything that questions Western knowledge as the only knowledge and Western ways forward as the only way, to me, is the right way. If we're asking lots of questions and feeling confused and bemuddled, then I think that's a great way to start, because when we talk with our local Aboriginal friends and they know country, that's where the answers come from, country. So, yeah. So if anyone wants to stay connected to us, please do. The website is www.earthlaws.org.au, and you can email us anytime. I was about to say my return button's not working. So please do stay in touch, because we are going to be doing this course with Penny and Joe, and AELA is involved with lots of other international networks around civil society bioregioning, and we want to support or promote or get out of the way and leave you to it, but let's join forces here in Australia, whatever shape or form we're doing. So that's our little blurb for Australia. So my big question is, where do we sign up? Did you want to drop a little web page in the link? Or I think I have signed up, but I want to know that I'm in the right place and that everyone else can get connected. And then my other question, sorry, pop it in.
No, go ahead. If you had another question, pile it on.
My only other question is how can we make sure Australia's voice, both through our Indigenous leaders and our amazing people doing bioregional work, can be shared into other networks? So please keep us in mind when you host events or invite people in. I know everyone on this call knows the great work that lots of people are doing, and we could all love to have a giant love in and share. So.
Ooh, well, I was over like doing a happy dance, like, go Michelle. I was like, really, and I'd seen some of those slides you'd given before, and I was like, yes, I wanted to just add to it with a concrete example of something we just had the honor of being a part of last week, and then come back to that bigger question of how do we share our stories. So last week, Penny and I were in the greater Tikaranto bioregion, which you probably haven't heard of, so let me show it to you.
Please do.
The greater Tikaranto bioregion is right here.
Yeah.
And so this is in basically the lower part of the map takes you into the United States. The upper part of the map takes you into Canada, because there's a really dumb straight line dividing the countries. But,
that is dumb.
But this is a map. There are others. But this is one map that shows you the fuzzy boundaries. These are like membranes, they're not fixed, of the greater Tikaranto bioregion. The word Tikaranto is an Algonquin word, and it's the word that the city of Toronto is named after. Tikaranto is a place where the trees meet the water, is what it means in the Algonquin language. And the main geologic structures are the Niagara Escarpment, which is a geologic pattern that is the reason we have the Great Lakes in North America. And then the Oak Ridges Moraine, which is gravel and sand accumulated from the movement of ice sheets during the ice ages. That's the birthplace of 65 rivers. And so this is a place that is really profoundly shaped by the geologic patterns that you see there. But there's also a really important thing, is that within the boundaries of this physical space are 8 First Nations. And so last week, and I'll just take off that screen now. Last week, Penny and I were at a gathering with representatives, not from the tribal councils, which were set up by the Canadian government to destroy Indigenous governance, but actual respected elders, knowledge keepers, and other kinds of respected leaders within the 8 First Nations, together with representatives from the 13 conservation authorities, which is the provincial government's institution that's organized around watersheds for doing ecosystem restoration and conservation work, together with kids representing a network of 50 schools of earth stewards, and many others that were just in the mix. And what we were there to explore was the two-eyed way of seeing, which is Haudenosaunee elder came up with this phrase, two-eyed seeing, as a way of attempting to talk about the treaties in Canada, the treaties between the First Nations and the Canadian government, and how they were seeing from very different worldviews. So it started by saying, well, what if we had 2 ways of seeing and we let them be different? And then we find a respectful, ethical place between them. But they need to come together. We need a more holistic way of seeing. And so what we were hosting, or we were participating in, and we were sort of co-hosting with the people who led it, was the convening of how these conservation authorities that are doing a lot, they work with hundreds of ecosystem restoration projects each year. How can they bring in cultural perspectives and practices from the First Nations? How can the First Nations define what kinds of mapping should be done? How can they create their own data sovereignty for the data, and so forth? And so the thing that was really powerful was that we recognized that they needed to be present and together, but honoring their difference. It's not making a mushy thing together. It's super important. So it's basically saying what you're talking about Australia, they're doing in Canada, their own version of. And
Yeah.
hell yes, super important.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, thank you. That's a wonderful example. And I love seeing the maps of places and knowing, how people in their culture formed around the living world and how it shapes us. Absolutely. And I just want to share one last photo that completely relates to what you were just saying, because one of the great areas of inspiration for me is the work that groups like Nailsma do. This is a conference that one of the AELA folk went to in 24 and I went in 25. And this is, you can see Barry Hunter and our beloved friend who's passed away now, but Ross Williams, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people coming together to talk about how to care for country and how to reimagine conservation. And the discussions are so rich and so challenging and difficult. There's no pretense here that we all speak the same language or that we look at the world the same way. And the final thing I'll share is that one of the really fantastic book series in Australia, which is called the Songlines series, and there's lots of different books. And Mary Graham's just released one with another non-Indigenous author. But Margot Neal, one of the editors, talks about building the third archive. And what she means is Aboriginal people have their knowledge and their systems, and Westerners have their knowledge and their systems. And I like this third archive. It's a little bit Western, but it's an idea of building a knowledge place and a meeting place where we can all be ourselves, but we all come in with deep respect, or what Mary Graham would call deep autonomous regard for the relational way that we have to work. So yeah, this is exciting stuff. I can't wait to join your course and be part of those discussions and connect with everyone else. We're out of time, and I do apologize for taking up 4 minutes, but 5, maybe 6. I just think it's so important to take these chances to let Aussies know that if you're out there doing great things, let's all connect as best we can and then connect with our friends in that gorgeous fractal bioregional kind of way. That is so good. So Penny and Joe, a huge thank you to you. Is there any final comments you wanted to say before we wrap up and say fare thee well?
I was going to say something about narrative, but I'll ask if you want to say anything first.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for having us here. I feel just such resonance with what you shared, Michelle, and I'm just, always excited to connect more deeply. So glad that our networks are connecting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's a nice setup for, you had asked about sharing our stories and our learnings. One of the things that we found with the way that we have created an ecosystem of funding, where we're able to find money in little places and move it to others. And we discovered that we needed a particular reciprocity agreement. There are lots of reciprocity agreements, but with funding, the reciprocity agreement was, we will give you money, from whatever fund it is, we will give you money to do the bioregional organizing that you do. And in reciprocity, you inspire and educate by sharing your story. And so sometimes that would be, well, you're organizing an event and include in your budget that there's a filmmaker so that you can create a short video of what happened. Or it could be a song as written and composed and performed. People have done all kinds of creative things. Theater has been done and on and on. But the important thing is that the thing that is weaving us is the storying, the verbing of story, or yes, as the folks on your continent would say it, yarning. This yarning is so important. So I would say that that's what we're trying to do. And I feel like that's what we've just done for the last hour. So
absolutely.
Yeah, more of that.
That's why I invited you to tell us all about what you're doing, because, we all, as you say, we all want to connect with each other and be inspired to keep going, definitely on the hard days and also on the good days. So on that lovely positive note, thank you again for your time today, especially given you've been traveling and you're weary. We will have you back to give us more updates perhaps later in the year, and maybe we'll have to conspire together. So next year when AELA is hosting lots of bioregional gatherings, we'll get you over to come and play in Australia. If you can handle the long haul flight, that is. It's nasty.
It's totally worth it.
It would be. All right. Well, look, there's lots of people sending through lovely comments. Thanks, everybody. Everyone's going, thank you,
everyone.
and thanks for sharing. Yeah, so we'll finish up now. I just wanted to say our next bioregional webinar is going to be a bit different because I'll be talking, not just hosting, and we're looking at bioregional law. A colleague and I, Kari Crisp, recently wrote a chapter to try and infuse the joys of bioregioning into a big textbook for the US. And I've used Mary Graham and Anne Paulina's writings and learnings to inspire and to get the Australian knowledge into a different space. So we'll be talking about, well, what is this law? And yeah, it's an ancient system of law, but how can we push Western law to be a little different too while it's falling apart? Anyway, that's not a positive note. While it's growing into something new and wonderful. Again, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your time being with us today, everybody. Really appreciate it and hope to connect very soon.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
and
everybody.
we
Bye.
look forward to the next round. Bye-bye.
Yeah, see you. Good luck with the coming course. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.